record. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, I've got to agree, yeah. Okay. My name is Paul Armand. That's me putting my hand up there. I just want to test, do we have an audience?
Got 25 and counting.
25 and counting, so I can say, so we can assume that there's already people joining. Well, let me then say good evening to everybody. You're currently looking at 4 Sydney High School old boys. My name is Paul Armand from the class of 81, although I left in 82. We've got Alex Feldman. Hand up, Alex, just to make sure, from the class of 2003. We have Hilbert Chu from the class of 2000, and we have Brian Wrench from the class of 2005. Guys, that is all of you students and parents that are listening, and whoever else that might have dropped into this conversation, hopefully all very friendly to us. If you've got any questions, we've opened the chat line, and the chat line is the place that we'd prefer you to drop those questions in. We'll probably interrupt things as we're sort of moving along, and we'll go to the chat and then come back. So please feel free. That's probably the best way to shoot your questions. We think we've anticipated 99% of your questions, but you never know. You might come up with one that we just didn't expect. I can actually confirm that there's at least 36 people that have already signed into this. So welcome to all of you, and we're really glad you're on board. We've got a few themes that we want to kick off, but you're facing 4 lawyers at the moment, 4 lawyers who each started at Sydney Boys High. What I wanted to do to kick us off, Hilbert, Alex, and Brian, I'd like to focus on the theme of the decision to study law. You know, why study law? For some people, the law is in their family. There's a certain inevitability about moving into law. For others, and I should say, you know, Sydney High has got an incredible tradition of multiple generations of old boys who have gone into the law. There's others where it's a mission or a calling. That's why they get into the law. Maybe you think the money might be good. But do you even know what the law is and what it means to study the law and where it might lead you to? So on these sorts of themes and openings about the decision to study law, I'd like to open it up to our panel and maybe go over to Hilbert, class of 2000, who's a barrister. If you could perhaps kick it off, Hilbert, and get us going.
Sure, thanks, Paul. To be honest, there was no real careful planning from me to pick a career in law. Like most people from an immigrant background, growing up in Western Sydney, it really was a case of my parents telling me, you've got 3 options: medicine, engineering, or law, or you're out of the house. I didn't get the marks for medicine. Everyone else in my family was an engineer, so I didn't want to do that. And it came down to really, my father said, you're always arguing with me. Why don't you go off and try to make a living out of that? And so I picked it. And to be honest, it really took a long time for me to understand what it meant to be a lawyer and what it really involves. It took many years, and it really wasn't until I started working in it that I felt comfortable that this was the career choice for me.
Alex, Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So my parents, I'm also from an immigrant background. I wasn't given 3 choices. I was given 2. So they said either medicine or law. I also didn't get the marks for med. I wanted to be an architect, and I had no intention of being a lawyer or a doctor at any point in time. If I'd been given that engineering exception, maybe I would have tried to argue that architecture and engineering are similar, but I was an architect until the very last moments when you had to make the final decision And my parents, who were better lawyers than me, but not being lawyers, convinced me to become a lawyer. And so here I am down the legal pathway, having always wanted to be an architect. And for what it's worth, I've never looked back.
Well, I have to say, I probably have a different. I didn't have any choice. My parents wanted me to become a doctor, and I said, "Bugger that! I liked arguing," and that was probably the start when I disagreed with my parents. So, as a lawyer, I always disagree, and that was the journey. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I was sort of up and down about commerce law, but I decided law was my calling, and that was the battleground I chose, and to express who I am today. So that's probably my journey.
Brian, it's interesting that you mentioned that you said that law was your calling. At such a young age, a lot of people might think that that's unusual, that you felt a calling to law. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, look, I was very, very fortunate to do work experience at my current law firm at the moment. And when I first...
Can you say, what law firm is that? Can you tell us a bit about that law firm?
Yeah, so that's a law firm called Murphy's Lawyers. We probably do the biggest criminal cases in the state, or if not Australia. So, for example, we acted for a footballer called Sam Burgess. We've acted for actors, celebrities, failed celebrities, like people who, all walks of life, and I'm very lucky. Like, even, for example, we've had dealings with, people, billionaires, millionaires, but also people just walking through, the Aboriginals who don't have anything, in their, or Indigenous people who don't have anything in their pocket. So we represent all walks of life, and I did work experience there, and that's how I got the calling. And a QC called Philip Bolton is known as one of the top QCs in Australia, and that's a barrister. For people listening at home, he said, if you love it now, you always like it. And that's what captivated me, and that's how I decided, well, this is what I want to do and hone our craft, because ultimately a lawyer is helping people, and that's what I attracted to me. It was a profession. Yeah.
And just following on from that, I mean, did the things that you do at Sydney High, did that help you with that decision making or that calling, and where you ended up at the initial stages?
Yeah, I have a lot to thank for Sydney High. I owe so much to them, because it gives you the opportunity to be better than who you are, and gives you desire and goals, and it fosters that. And nobody, I think, hopefully I speak for some of the others here, but I don't think anyone, every teacher taught you could be better than yourself, to aim high and to try and achieve it. And also sometimes Sydney High teaches you how to fail as well, and to get back from that failure and keep on going. And the lessons I still learn, I still enact today, I got from my lessons at Sydney High.
Yeah. Hilbert, of course, you're a champion debater at Sydney Boys High, and even won a GPS competition during your time there. Do you think that there's a connection between your interest and, in fact, your talent in debating and where you've ended up now as a barrister?
Oh, definitely, Paul. One of the great things, as Brian said, about Sydney Boys is that not only do you get the opportunities to excel in things like debating, it could be anything, but there's a sense of being driven about it and trying to do the best you can, and even beyond that. And the thing about doing that in debating is what sets you apart from other teams is not often your natural ability, it's your ability to grasp issues quickly and to get to the nub of things. And that's a really important thing as a lawyer, particularly as a barrister, where you're trying to do that on your feet quickly. And so I think I didn't realize at the time, but my time as a debater really set me up for the sort of barrister I am now, 21 years later.
Yeah, because I guess, I mean, obviously being a debater is not a prerequisite for being a lawyer, but being a debater can be a prerequisite for doing the sort of work that you particularly do. I'm sure, though, that there are lots of other things that we did at high school which have contributed to where we are now, and the choices that we all made to go to law school. whether that be perhaps leadership on the sporting field or in rowing, Alex? I mean, do you sort of see, Alex, how sport may have also contributed to the choices you made in the early days, particularly?
Yeah, look, 100%. Well, what's interesting is that the two things that I've just scribbled down is that school taught me a curiosity. So, you know, what Brian and Hilbert were talking about, the sort of the leap that the teachers forced you to take toward a level of curiosity that meant that in law and for me in business, I'm always the one asking the question of how, and I always want to know how things work more than the people around me. And as a result, I've excelled in my career. And then on the sporting field, for me, it was rowing, and I was more passionate about rowing than I was far more passionate about rowing in school, for what it's worth, when I was there. But a work ethic that I learnt from that sport was just unbelievable. You know, the ability to be on the water at 5:30, but actually performing at that point in the morning, and then knowing how to get everything done in the day so that the next morning I could go and do it all over again and all over again, and do that, you know, 10 or 13 times a week, depending on what we were doing at that point in time. I've taken that learning from my version of the sporting field at high through to every part of my career. And I still hold that discipline to this day.
Mm. And Alex, you've taken probably the more diverse path compared to us other lawyers here today. Obviously started as a practicing lawyer at a very prestigious law firm, but you obviously had your talents and strengths and maybe some luck that took you into other places and areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that early part of your journey particularly? Yeah,
happily. So having not known that I wanted to be a lawyer and given a bit of a nudge in the right, what ultimately turned out to be the right direction, I went to Macquarie. I did my law degree. To be frank, throughout the degree, focused more on other things that I could have been doing when I was there, not necessarily the law degree, but I got good marks and found it relatively easy. And then had the choice of which firms to go to. And I got I think a really good suggestion at the time, which was just pick the biggest one. And for me, that was a good suggestion. That's not the right suggestion for everyone, but because I was someone who didn't know what they wanted to do and wasn't sure that law was even for me at that point in time, that suggestion worked really well, because I ended up in a place that had heaps of opportunities and did lots of different types of law. So the bigger the firm, the more variety of things that the firm does typically. And for me, that was great, because I got to see lots of things from very early on in my career, and ultimately fell in love with infrastructure and loved being able to say that I worked on that pipeline, or I worked on that, you know, piece of infrastructure that you drive past on the highway, which is the power station that you see every time you go down to the south coast or the north coast. And those experiences of being able to drive past the thing and say, I worked on that hospital, I worked on that tunnel, meant for me a connection between the real world and what I was doing at work. And for someone who was deeply curious and wanted to be an architect, and maybe engineering would have been good too, that connection between the intellectual that I was doing at the office and the physical that I could see in the real world was incredibly important. And then where that curiosity ultimately took me was technology. So the more I learned about the things that I liked, the more curious I got. And in the energy sector, tech is a huge part of what enables the way that all of us flick our lights on and off ultimately. And that interest in tech led me to a number of tech investments, a number of tech firms that I worked at. And while still a lawyer, I do far more non-lawyering today than lawyering. And for me, law was a gateway into business. It was a way of understanding how business is conducted, how money flows around, and it opened up amazing opportunities through that, and just a combination of really hard work. Yeah, good stuff. I was going to move on to a slightly different topic, and I think that the next experience that the boys and their parents will have once you go beyond the choice of law is starting at university, wherever that might be. Now, I'm going to pick on Brian because he is the youngest member of our panel, and so he might have the clearest memories.
But before I hand over to you, Brian, before I hand over to you, Brian, I was just going to say that I guess we need to be aware that the class of 2021 is likely to be entering a very different university life than the one that we all experienced. And I don't necessarily want to assume that one is better or worse, but I would like to believe that the class of 2021, when they enter university or not long afterwards, that it will be not so restricted as it's currently likely to be at the very beginning. And hopefully some of the things that we're going to talk about now will give you encouragement about what life might be like at university. So, Brian, reaching back into the depths of the early 2000s and mid 2000s, tell us what it was like for you at university.
Well, I think you're opening old wounds here, to be honest, Paul. But look, it was a different experience from school, and I also think it's a transition from becoming the top of the tree, to the bottom of the tree again, and sort of finding your feet as a man in the world. I think one of the things is learning responsibility, like it's on you, and that nobody's there to sort of sometimes push you or things like that, which is the guidance and support we necessarily had at Sydney High. You sort of have to enact those skills in university because it's up to you. Like if you want to get a high distinction, it's up to you to get a high distinction. If you want to fail, it's up to you. And you might go through a variety of changes yourself. You might, I know a lot of people, you go, okay, I like this subject or I don't dislike this, and you change your ideas about what you think law is. I think the first year is just transition, and it's quite overwhelming at the start, but it's an interesting experience.
You chose to do commerce law.
Yes.
Was there a particular reason why you chose that combination?
Look, I still had options that I thought maybe I wanted to get into commerce at some stage, and I think it's a good degree generally because it opens a lot of doors. You can either use your law degree to go into the business field, or use that degree to then work for a commercial firm. So it's a degree that opens a lot of opportunities, and then, as what Alex says, then opens up further opportunities down the track for whatever you want to do later down in the future.
And that was actually going to lead me to just asking Alex, and particularly in his journey into the technology and infrastructure world, reflecting back now, what do you think the 17, 18-year-old boys from High, what sort of, if they're looking at law, they're inevitably looking at a double degree. Where do you see some of the really interesting opportunities that they might be tapping into by choosing the right combination at this early stage?
I think it still ultimately comes down to the same advice that I got then, which is just do things that you like because you'll be good at them, and then use that as the springboard. But if you happen to like tech and you happen to know a little bit about coding or a little bit about technology, these days what's interesting is that it used to be that you needed to learn how to code. Now actually understanding how infrastructure and technology works rather than the code itself is probably even more important as a skill set. If you happen to have an interest in that and you combine that with law or commerce for that matter, that would be an unbelievable, for us, law was a gateway into the things that we're passionate about. I think as we move deeper into a tech-enabled world where tech is part of everything that we do, having an interest in either the architecture or code side of it would be amazing. But beyond that, if that doesn't happen to be an interest, so if I was, if I'm talking to the 17-year-old version of me, the last thing I would have wanted to do was code something or be on the building side. I would have wanted to be in the design and tech room, building stuff out of wood and metal instead, or sitting in the history class. My advice to myself would have been the same. Just do things that make you happy, and then you'll ultimately find that you get good results, and that virtuous cycle continues.
Yeah. And Hilbert, I mean, you went to University of Sydney. Can you tell us a bit about life, what it was like for you at the turn of the millennium and just beyond then?
You make it sound like so long ago. Look,
but also perhaps what you hear about it now, and you know what you think about the place. What are your memories of the place?
Memories. Well, for me, going from school to university was a bit like going from building Lego kits to having access to the brick pit. If you watch Lego Masters, if suddenly you're not constrained by directions anymore, you've got it all there. Your only constraint is the amount of time you've got. And as Brian says, that really frees you up to approach it however you like. And a lot of people, and that includes myself in the first year or so, can lose a bit of direction simply because there are too many options, there are too many things you can do. There's not a lot of direction about how to do it. But over time, I think the people who find their feet find that that's actually an advantage, because it means there's no limit to your curiosity. That's that word Alex used earlier. There's no limit to how far you can push yourself to investigate something, to go into something. If you've got a topic you're interested in, do a paper on it. Your lecturers are actually quite pleased. Now, that was the situation when I went to uni 20 years ago, and the class sizes in arts at Sydney were really small. So I remember going to a tutorial in first year for first year Latin, and we had a class of 8 people with a professor teaching us. I just don't think that happens as in the same way anymore. From what I've heard, the class sizes are much bigger. And so in some ways, it's even more important that you drive yourself, because what you're going to get from the university is a bit of a guide, but not much. The rest is up to you. And university is a lot more than just getting the marks and passing the exams. It's about the entire experience. And for me, doing arts was all about learning about things that other than law. Learning about people, learning about languages. And looking back now, I think I learned more about evidence and how to judge and analyze evidence through my history degree in arts than I did through law. So yeah, I didn't appreciate that at the time.
Yeah.
Brian? Yeah, can I follow on what Hilbert said? I think that's quite important. And part of the Sydney High experience is that you learn all these other skills, not just simply the academic thing, that actually help you later translate into our careers and professions. As what Alex was saying about, yes, rowing, I loved rowing and rugby and all those sort of things. And I learned so much about discipline and pushing myself to limits that I didn't think were possible, which I then later translated to law, and I think just the Sydney High experience, that's one of those factors that we learned the skill sets, which allowed us to translate that into real life. Like we may not remember what exactly was said in science class, but we remember the failures of when we push ourselves or debating, all those other extracurricular activities, which later translated to the people who we are today and the passions which Hilbert was talking about.
Yeah, and if you guys on the panel, if you were your year 12 selves, and not wanting to have too many regrets, but if you were giving some advice to the students in years 9, 10 and 11 about what they should be doing to make all these decisions that are so important, or that appear to be so important at age 17 and 18 as you're finishing school, what sort of advice would you be passing on? So you're speaking. Let's assume that somebody in year 10 is saying to you, well, how are you deciding? Because these guys in year 12, you guys in the audience, you're going to be leaders and you're going to be leading, and people are going to be looking up to you. They're already doing so right now. You guys who are prefects or in year 12, that people look up to you and all the things that you've achieved, and you get all the claps and the ovations. If to get to where you've got to, what would you be telling those younger students, that about what they should be doing to prepare themselves? I don't like to think that I had too many regrets at high, but I think I did. I think that there were so many things that I did a lot, but I feel there were so many things that I could have done that I didn't do, or I didn't follow through, or I just got a little bit slack every now and then, and I just wish I had done it. You know, I was in the chess club in year 7, and I never ever really took it on any further, and I really should have. And I played a lot of sport, but I never played a musical instrument, and I really regret that I had the opportunity to learn all those musical instruments and to get involved in something. So I do have some regrets, and I think if I'd taken up some of those, that might have armed me even better for the choices and the decision in the life that I would lead. I don't know, maybe Hilbert, Alex, or Brian, have you got anything like that you want to share?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to kick us off. Probably the one for me was, so I did lots, and the regret for me isn't that I should have done more, but I think I was pretty anxious about two things when in the younger years, and that anxiety fell away, and I wish someone had sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said two things. I think the first that they would have said to me was, and my older self should have said, firstly, don't stress so much about the subjects where you're not great at them. And the reason my older self should have said that is you're surrounded by the absolute best. So when you feel not particularly good at something, you're comparing against the future leaders of the country, the 99.9s. And so actually not being that great at it means that you're actually really, really good at it already. Your comparison points and your relativity scale is completely skewed. And the example I give in my case was maths, and I always felt like I was terrible at maths and I never really got it. And relative to the guys around me, I didn't. But then fast forward to today, and in the business circles in which I'm in, my understanding of finance and maths is equally as good as anyone else in any room that I'm in. And that's despite the fact having felt at that point in my life that I wasn't particularly good at it. And that was a cause of anxiety that it really shouldn't have been. And I wish someone had just said, just focus on the stuff you're good at. Don't stress about the stuff that isn't quite working. Work at it, don't give it up, but don't worry about it because your perspective is completely skewed.
Yeah. Hilbert, you seem to be eager. Do you have something you'd like to add there?
I suppose there's a couple of things that with old age I would take to my younger self. One is concentrate on what you're doing there and then. Do that well, and don't worry too much about the long-term career pathways, that sort of thing. I mean, they're important, but so much of my own career has been really one step at a time. Like I did one thing and then this next opportunity came up and I did that. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to work for myself? And I went to the bar and I got to the bar, and then it just turns out I ended up in the area I mostly do, which is insurance and professional negligence. So if you looked at that in foresight, that's not a career path you would necessarily plan. The other thing I would probably tell myself is winning things and getting good outcomes and prizes and things like that. That's all really great, and it will be very helpful. But at the end of the day, what makes a good lawyer succeed is what kind of a person you are. With your peers, with other people, with people you work for, with judges you appear before. And so it's not just about being great and having prizes, but also about whether you are being the best kind of person you can be in what you do. I think that's sometimes lost when you're young and you're out there to try to achieve a lot. And that's something I would probably tell myself as a calming influence as well.
Yeah. Just on that, I really like the idea that you introduced there, Hilbert, about the idea of taking opportunity.
Yeah.
That if you're in the present, something that presents itself to you, you're in the present, and so therefore you can look at an opportunity with open eyes and say, this is an opportunity. Yes, I can take it. This is a road that I'm ready to go down. My little example on that front was during my career, just totally out of the blue, the partner came up to me in my law firm at Minters and said, you've got a choice about where you want to go next. He said, we're opening a new employment practice in Canberra and in Hong Kong. Which one would you like to lead? And there I was, a guy in Sydney that had spent more than a decade practicing law in Sydney. And I got this incredible choice just thrust upon me about what I want to do. But I was in a position where I could be very open and make that choice, and I damn well chose it. And I chose traveling overseas and practicing in Hong Kong as a lawyer, which I did for several years. And, you know, I think that was one of those incredible forks in the road that I think was very formative in my life and in the development of my career in that first decade. Brian, I suppose too, you've sort of taken opportunities. I mean, the obvious one was that you were working at a very young age for the law firm that you're in fact still at, effectively. And that was an opportunity that you took up early. I mean, is that a good example? And are there other examples for you where something just came and your presence of mind enabled you to make what turned out to be a really good choice, or perhaps not even a good choice?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things. I think the guiding compass of life is passion, I think, and you should allow your passion to decide which way you want to go. I think secondly, just following this opportunity about opportunities, Sydney High offers those opportunities, and it's the extracurricular, it's the teachers, it's everybody, the community, and the only, like, I don't have that many regrets about Sydney High. But what the other old boys I talk to about they regret not taking up the extracurricular activities up, like whether it's debating, whether it's rifle shooting, whether it's SRC, whether it's prefect, whether it's rowing, because they miss those. That's when you form the bonds and the lessons and who you are. And it's not about winning either. And I think the old boys remember Mr. Day. He was one of the excellent teachers at our school, and he regrettably passed away, I think, about 10 years ago. And he said, Sydney High teaches you how to lose. And it's true, because you learn so much about that. And since you lose, you forge yourself, you do all the sports. But the bond we created through those times stand today. And then like I said, we later succeed in life, and we later do those things. And it's, I mean, we do win, of course, here and there, but that's when we discover ourselves, and it's taking advantage of all those opportunities. So the only thing I would say is just take advantage of every opportunity, because that's when you learn yourself. And that's when those lifelong lessons, that's when they talk about the old boys, is the old boys who did everything and then you learn so much about it. And that's when you discover yourself. I think with that, am I speaking right, Henry? You know, Hilbert, is that right? Like, we learn a lot more from the extracurricular, less about the school. Yeah,
absolutely. And you realize that the further away you are from it, that it's not necessarily, you know, coming first in this particular exam that you remember. It's the day that you got bowled out for 39 and you had a laugh about it with your team. You know, that's the sort of stuff that sticks with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how you just dealt with it and moved on. You know, we had a lot of that.
We learned a lot.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And that's the thing. We keep on going. We learn those lessons of courage to keep on going. It's, you know.
Yeah, because it's your peers and your friends that are going to get you through the next 20 years, 30 years. You know, that spot. Yeah.
And those are often the lifelong friends. So if I think about, you know, the many, many years on from high, so I finished in 03, the lifelong friends are the ones that you know, we sort of grew up effectively in our zooties at the sheds, and living effectively at the sheds for so many years and so many camps and so many nights, and they're the friends that are still around today in with the deepest bonds.
And I find that with any Sydney High boy, like if we say, oh, you know, with Sydney High, it's like we're brothers forever, even though we might not have gone the same year. You know, talk about the shared experience of that.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah, I know.
In fact, I knew you were an old boy, and I just walked up to you on the street and said, "Hi, I'm Paul Armand, and I know who you are. Do you want to come and do this panel?"
Of course, you know, Sydney High, yeah, and that's and I also think it still makes me smile in our hearts when we just think about Sydney High and how much we learn from it. That's why I think all of us are here today, because it just gave us this golden opportunity, you know. And it's hard to define it one way, but I think one of it is just the opportunity and then of different things you learn. And then that's why I think advice is just take advantage of every single opportunity.
Yeah. Look, this is probably a nice little segue into the next topic I'd like us to cover. I'm keeping an eye, by the way, our audience of students and parents. There's been a couple of questions so far, and I'm working them into our panel discussion. So please keep using the chat. Please keep any questions coming through, and we'll keep an eye out for you. The area I'd like to move into now is about finding meaning in life. And I know that can be a very profound question, but and it's at the core of our being. The career that we choose is likely to strongly influence that journey. The author Douglas Adams says the meaning of life is 42. In Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, the answer given at the end of the movie was this: well, it's nothing very special. Try and be nice to people, avoid eating fat, read a good book every now and then. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. I implore our audience to do a bit of research and look up Monty Python and look up Douglas Adams, because you probably haven't heard of them, but they are amazingly funny authors and writing groups. But on a more serious note, I think we all try to strive to find, why do we do what we do, not just in law, but in anything. But I'd like to focus on, perhaps with the panel, how might or how does or how should law contribute to giving you purpose and meaning and keeping you going and making you wake up in the morning during lockdown and shaving and showering and getting back in front of your computer. Who'd like to start? Perhaps Hilbert, why don't you kick us off?
All right. I suppose a couple of things come to mind. One is that being part of a profession, and for me being a self-employed person in private practice, which is what being a barrister ultimately comes down to, it means you're on your own and you depend on yourself. You're running your own business. It's up to you. And for me, that was always very appealing, that I wasn't an employee. I'm not dependent. I'm not answerable to a boss. I'm answerable to myself, and that was appealing. But the second thing, I think, Paul, is that being a lawyer, I think, ultimately means, however indirectly, you are serving a cause that is of benefit to the community. And that may be you're fighting a particular case and defending your client's rights, keeping them out of jail, whatever it is, or pursuing a right. It might be that it could be more high level, that you're defending the rule of law, whatever it is. You're making sure the system is working for most people. Or it could be that, say, in private practice, you are making sure that a particular infrastructure project is negotiated properly, that you've got a good outcome. But you're serving something or someone. And for me, that means it's more than just about money. It's about service. You do very well in terms of money as well, but that's not really the focus of it at the end of the day. So for me, that 90% of what we do is process, and it's pretty boring, and it's about just getting through the stuff. But it's the 10% when you get good results, when you are focusing on why are we doing this, that's what keeps me going, at least.
I don't want to make too many assumptions, of course, Brian, but you've chosen in the criminal law area, an area which often gets public attention through the media because of the personalities and people involved. And I'm going to make another assumption that, you had this calling very early in life with this firm, and I'm assuming that there must have been attraction with the people and the causes and the things that you had the opportunity to get involved in and to represent. Now, has that been a part of your journey about meaning and purpose?
Yeah, totally. And just flowing on what Hilbert's saying, part of being professional or something is there's no greater feeling doing something greater than yourself, like some higher aspiration. And it doesn't always come about, you know, and I always find, at least for me, I have to find something in them to fight for it, or whether it's in the client themselves. I like the client, I really like them, but the allegations are horrible. But I'll find something to fight for them, or I dislike the client. The client's terrible, but I believe in this rule of law that because it helps society and we are actually helping people. That's what a profession is. Like a lawyer is actually helping people, but we help in all different aspects of it. And what I think about being a lawyer, it's an opportunity to allow you to express who you are. And that's the arena. It's this ticket to be who you are, whether you do commercial, doing transactions, whether you do employment, you know, whether you do litigate. And I always tell everybody who becomes a lawyer, to get, you know, young lawyers come, so you've got to find out what works for you. And a lawyer allows you to be who you are. And that's what I love about it. For me, I love the combativeness, the litigation aspect of it, but that's not everybody. Some people want to do the conciliation or things like that. And then overall, as you say, you look at the stuff, you find the meaning that you're doing a greater purpose, and that gives you purpose in life. You know, I think Steve Jobs said the journey is the reward. You know, you doing this, the process, you find it, and you discover yourself during the journey. So I might have saved the client, but I learned so much about myself during that process, or any case, whether any difficult hurdle. And I think, you know, Alex, you put, you know, done stuff with your giant transaction, and you said you look at that building, and go, I was part of that, but you just go that you learnt part of that because you learnt part of yourself when you look at that building. And same with you, when you talk about the rule of law, you've done it, the case, you look at, you won it, and go, but I learned so much about me, and the case allowed me to be that person. And that's what I find really interesting about law. When you're passionate about it, it allows you to be yourself. And you know, and I think, like, I'll finish on this. Like Picasso said, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And that's what we do. Like we sometimes, all of us in our respective fields, we obviously use some talent, but we enjoy it, and then we assist by doing it. We perform our work, and that's, I just show back to your question. That's where I get a lot of meaning from, because you enjoy the process, and you discover yourself during the process, and that's, you can't place any money on that.
And then in my experience, and mine's different, right? So we've got two litigators on the call, and one that isn't, and there's really two different sides of law, right? One's combative, as you've described, one's in court, it's on your feet, it's argumentative, and everything you've described makes me want to break out in shingles. I've never been in a courtroom. That's not true. I've been in a courtroom a couple of times, but I hated every moment of it. I want to suppress those memories and go have a glass of wine every time I think of them. But law for me has opened up something completely different. And for me, it's about, for me, what the meaning is ultimately the people and the connections. And anyone who's ever done business with me, I start off by saying that businesses aren't real things. They're figments of our imagination, but at the end of the day, they're just collections of humans that want to do a particular thing at a particular point in time. You know, let me give you an example of that. Go touch Telstra. Can't touch it, can't feel it, not a thing. There are physical things out there, but they're not Telstra. What is Telstra? It's just a collection of humans that are trying to do that one thing at that point in time for a common goal. And for me, the journey is all about, you know, finding those people, finding those connections, enjoying that interaction, the relationship. And when, you know, Brian sort of said it's the project, you're absolutely right. The project's important because that gave me the ability to look at it. But actually, the thing I remember more is the time in the trench. I remember more that time, you know, at 2 a.m, writing that complex formula that then went into pricing how that asset works. But I remember the person that sat beside me. And that interaction and that connection that I built and that relationship that was formed is then going to be with me forever and with them forever. And for me, it's just about going through and being able to effectively scratch both of my two big itches, which is one, work with amazing people and collect them in my life and have them in my life and enjoy what they bring to me. And then curiosity, I get to work on things that are genuinely hard. And when someone poses a problem to a lawyer, they've already thought about the basic stuff usually. By the time they've come to us, whether it's in the commercial world or the litigious world, it's already difficult. And then they're trying to get us to solve the really, really hard bit that no one could have solved on their own. And that's the bit that I love. So it's that collection of both the human, the people, the connection, the for me, it's not the journey, it's the people that I get on the journey that are then part of my journey. And then the ability to have that curiosity itch scratched on a very regular basis, and really, really hard things that when you do solve them, there's the sense, that awesome sense of satisfaction going, yeah, I cracked that.
Yeah, and I think I think that's the important thing. Like, we're all different types of lawyers, and it allows us to be who we are as people and still be successful, because there's no one type of good lawyer, because they all play important parts in this giant ecosystem, which is law.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very important thing to try to grasp about where you get meaning in everything you do. And I'm sure, Alex, for example, you're still sort of wondering, that hole in your life not being an architect. But obviously you've found the creativity that being an architect offers. You've found that in law, and still being able to find meaning in life that the law is able to do for you or contribute to, which is fantastic. Brian, I can't help but wanting to focus on one particular story. The story, at least that from my reading and experience in the media. Before lockdown, and when I was still going to work in the city every day, I now work from home, by the way, in my own practice, and have done for the last 7 years. But walking through Martin Place every morning, nearly, I saw a famous or infamous protester carrying a board, which always had different words on it, interesting words on it. Sometimes they made sense and sometimes they didn't. And his name was Danny Lim. And I used to see him in Martin Place all the time. And then one day he wasn't there. And I read about Danny Lim in the newspapers. Can you tell us, Brian, what you're able to tell us a bit more about Danny Lim and your experience with him?
Danny Lim, he's an interesting person. He's a thought provoker, and he walks around with a giant sandwich board using a play on words. I don't think I should probably say on Zoom, but I usually play on words with CUNT or something. But most of the time he's saying smile, be happy, or offering free hugs. And on one occasion, when he was using one of his play on words tricks, he was arrested by the police unfairly. And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to represent him. And in the process, probably maybe legalising that offensive word, but also allowing people to express themselves freely. And so it was a pretty interesting case for me, because I got the opportunity, and he was, like I said, he.
Let me just ask you, so what was Danny actually charged with?
He was charged with offensive conduct. Yeah. And this was one of his signs was at the time when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister at the time, and he was a year in government and he's going terribly. And he said, at that time, he said, look, I'm going to change from now on. So what Danny Lim put a sign up saying, people can change. Tony, you can't, but made the A upside down, And so they deemed that offensive.
Mm.
And so they tried to say that was offensive, and it was a type of political censorship. And I was lucky enough to defend Danny on that and say, look, there's nothing. Well, firstly, it wasn't dishonest. Tony Abbott can't change. And secondly, people allowed to express their view in the way that they choose fit. And he just did it in the Australian jocular way. And it was an interesting case because I had to go to the history of where the meaning of the word CUNT came from. And it wasn't the first time it's been used. It was used by D.H. Lawrence in Lady Shapley's Lover. And that was in I think it was 1962. So
1862, I think.
Yeah, and one of the the litigation of it actually 1962. Would you believe? Yes, because they tried to ban the book at that stage because of the mention of it.
Hmm.
So,
and what was the punchline? Did you get him off?
Yeah, of course I did. Yeah,
Of course.
So now, so that's the Sydney High thing. Now we win. We're all winning now. We weren't winning back at Sydney High with the football or rowing. Okay, but now we're winning. So that's the lesson of Sydney High. We win later. But yeah, it was a good case. We went well.
Yeah. Hilbert, I'm sure you must have done a lot of interesting or worthwhile things. Have you perhaps got a story you want to share that with our audience today?
I can't give particular details because most of what I do involves either defending or suing doctors and engineers, surprisingly, given my choices in life. But I think what I can say is that the vast majority of the cases I do, they come and go. But sometimes when you're acting for very disabled children who are there because of a medical error, and you see the parents really struggling with looking after them because they're very disabled and they're very disadvantaged, and you can make a little bit of difference for them by pursuing their claim and not charging for it, trying to get that outcome for them. That's going back to the earlier point about the meaning of all of this. That gets you going, that sort of thing. And I'm sure Brian's the same. That you would defend all the Burgesses in your time, but it's the limbs, the Danny limbs that, yeah.
It's the unknowns, and like that, and sometimes as a criminal lawyer, you do some god awful cases, like terrible cases.
Yeah.
But, or even as a lawyer, like any side, but you do those for those opportunities for those moments when you can actually truly make a difference. And it doesn't have to actually be something like society. It can just be something that you do all this hard work just for that one moment when you can really just succeed and you just go, this is what I can do. This is what I can really help society or something at that stage. Yeah.
What about you, Paul?
Yeah, well, obviously as an employment lawyer, work situations are, they come up every single day. I usually have about 3 or 4 pro bono cases I do a year, which is sort of like my contribution. I do a wide variety of cases in unfair dismissal, to a lesser extent in anti-discrimination and those sorts of areas. But I think these days I'm more experiencing that I think employers get a hard deal sometimes, and I'm feeling like I have to stand up for employers and their rights. So that's a lot of the time I'm presented with a situation that's already so far gone, and I think that's been alluded to, I think, from Alex. Usually a problem has evolved so far down the track, and it's only when they say, right, now we've got to get the lawyer involved, and you're sort of faced with this situation that's very complicated and almost impossible to unravel. So you always hope you've got that client that'll come early enough. And so, I'm dealing with the situations involving COVID right now. I've got, one senior executive who was stood down by his employer, and And then at the end of the stand down period, after just getting JobKeeper for months and months and months, they made him redundant at the end. And we said, hey, that's not just. You stand somebody down, they don't get paid other than getting JobKeeper, they lose all this money, and then you get rid of them at the end. Why did you do that to this person? So we're currently suing in the federal court about that case, and that might be something you might want to follow towards the end of the year. So no, look, I get lots of interesting situations. I've got the guy who's got an exemption from wearing a mask during our COVID crisis, and he wants to keep his job, but no one wants to work with him. What do you do? And we're going through a very interesting stage with him. So we just, some of the most unique situations are really presenting themselves these days in employment law every day. So I'm certainly grateful for all the variety of cases that I've done over the years. Yeah, so look, that's I guess my contribution to that part of it. Look, what I wanted to do is, we're approaching the hour, and maybe just concisely stating what final piece of advice or insight or something do you think that each of us could offer to our audience of students and parents who are just about to take that leap through the HSC and into university and perhaps study law? What's the best thing that we might be able to tell them? I'm going to pick Alex to maybe go first on this one.
Sure.
You're up, Alex.
The one bit of advice I would give is to say yes a lot, and to default to saying yes. And so whenever asked a question, whenever given an opportunity, whenever posed with a challenge, just say yes and then work it out. And the reason I say that is because, firstly, I'm firmly of the view that you create your own luck. And luck is just a product of how many balls you're juggling at that point in time. When you happen to catch one, everyone goes, shit, that was lucky. You caught it. That's amazing. But actually, you caught one out of so many that you were juggling at that point in time. They only saw that one movement. And so in saying yes a lot, you get to create that luck and that opportunity. It also means you end up taking some risk, because when you say yes, things might not work out. I think that's okay. I think you should still say yes, and you should accept the risk and be grounded in the fact that, firstly, you're already so far ahead of the average, and you're part of an incredible community. And that's probably the last part of it for me. Remember about the community. Don't be afraid to reach into it. Don't be afraid to use the network of friends that you've got. And they're not just the people you're with today. They're the people from 50 years ago at High who are still out there in the world, who are still, capable and happy and always willing to lend a hand. And so on that basis, you should say yes a lot, because whatever risk you're faced with, there is inevitably someone in that community that has solved that problem already and that can give you some pretty good advice. And so for me, it's that, take the risk, say yes, get into it, and then lean on the community whenever you need to, because it's there for that.
Yeah, good one. Maybe Brian, what do you have to say about that? What would you like to tell our audience?
And just following on that, taking yes, be afraid of failure. Failure is the first step of education, and it's part of the journey. Like when you finish your HSC, it's not the end of the journey, it's just the start. And it's such a long journey. And to take advantage of any opportunity, and you will fail. But what, as I said, senior high does teach you, I know it's a weird saying, but it does teach you how to fail, but it keeps you to keep on going, to actually succeed, and to keep on saying, because life is experience, and just to take advantage of those opportunities. And it's the start of a long journey. And don't be afraid of failure, because we learn so much more from the failures than we do from the wins. And that's where the bonds and who we are today, so that one day we do win, it's what it is. And I think senior high teaches that. And I'd encourage everybody who's starting their journey, to keep on doing it, take advantage of opportunity, and also don't neglect those opportunities, those extracurricular activities, because there where I think that's the responsibility. That's why we are here today, not necessarily because of the academic. It's because the opportunities of the extracurricular activities and the bonds with merged. It gave us the skills to later succeed down the track.
Yeah. And Hilbert, looks like we're going to finish with you on this one. Tell us what you think.
My advice would be to have mentors, have lots of them, have different ones at every stage of your career. You need people to help you, and most people are really want to help you. And you want to be the sort of person that people want to succeed. And you do that by building bonds with lots of people all around you. I look back and at different stages of my career, I've had different mentors. They come and go, but I just couldn't have had the sort of focus and direction that I think I've had without that help.
Yeah. Look, I want to go over to the students and parents in our studio audience right now. I'm encouraging anybody to type up any questions in the chat line if you can, or there's some way that if you've got anything burning that you just need to know that us experts might be able to give you some insight about, or at least tell you where you might be able to get that answer. I think it's really great that one of the common themes about particularly as we draw to the end of this is just how important the bond to Sydney High is to our ability to either succeed or to find meaning in what we're doing. And certainly, I think it's just incredible that just because you went to our school, it's just so easy to talk to somebody who you don't know, who might be 10, 20 or 50 years older than you or younger than you, and you can actually walk up and talk to them. And quite often you can get more out of it than that. I certainly, over the last 5 or so years, I've had either university students from high or even a couple of high school students reach out to me to say, "Oh, Paul, can I just have a chat over a cup of coffee with you? I just got a few questions, and you might be able to point me in the right direction, or you might know somebody that could help me, or just whatever." And I'm always open to that, and I'm sure, almost without failure, that Sydney High boys are open to that, and not just talking about the law. I'm talking about the general culture that stays with us well beyond the years that we leave. So maybe that's a bit of a shout out to our students and parents that are out there too, is that don't be afraid. Don't just think about approaching us, but think about, if you can go into Google or some of the other places on the internet and find so many people that have done such a wide variety of things from Sydney High. And it's amazing if you just reach out and say, "I'm also from Sydney High," they're happy to talk to you. So I think that's a really important one. I still haven't seen any questions come through though. So what I might then do, and Paul Harrapin, our president, the president of the Sydney High Old Boys Union, if you're online as well, I might see if we're going to wrap it up now. What do you think, Paul?
Yep, I'm online, Paul. Hey everyone, thanks for filling in the poll that I just put out. I'll share the poll with everyone. You'll see the results come through, which is, thankfully, we have not far off 85% rating of found this really helpful, 0% didn't find it helpful, and a small percentage somewhat. And also almost a dead heat in terms of what you'd like to hear, what careers you'd like to hear from next. Technology, finance, medicine, taking the top 3 slots. So that's interesting because we have technology and finance coming up this month. You should receive those details pretty soon. Medicine, not yet, but we'll maybe look to schedule that after the trial exams. Just on behalf of the old boys, I'd like to thank Paul for hosting the event tonight, and also Hilbert, Alex and Brian for taking time out of your schedule to give back to the boys. Fascinating discussion. I know we all like to hear the stories, but importantly, the career paths, the choices that got you where you got, and give the boys and the parents, something to think about here. This has been our most highly attended webinar of the 4 we've done so far. So that's great to see. And with that, I'll put an end and thank everyone again for attending, and look forward to seeing you all on the next career webinar coming up soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.